The United Nations just tried to pass a global tax, but President Trump has pushed back on this and unleashed absolute fury. This is probably something that you didn't see anywhere in the news. In fact, I only found it because I often find the sort of fringe news that you don't see anywhere else. That's why you're subscribed to the channel, no doubt. But this one is absolutely crazy that we're going to talk about today. Just mind-blowing. So this started as a Wall Street Journal opinion piece. I'll just show you what we're looking at here a second. Here it is. So it started as an opinion piece. The United Nations is about to tax you. So this came out a couple of days ago, and the announcement was today. A new global climate tax would be the ultimate in taxation without representation. So this is absolutely legitimate and true. The United Nations actually decided to put on a global tax, which accounted to roughly 10 to 12% on every single person around the world. It is absolutely insane. And most of the European leaders actually signed off on this. It boggles my mind that President Trump was, and a couple of others, there was a handful of people, were the only ones that said that this needs to be vetoed. And not only, he's actually gone a lot further. Not only has it been vetoed, but he's actually said, camera's playing up yet again today, but he's actually said not only is he vetoing it, but if anybody who votes for it and tries to get this passed is going to get their own sanctions, as it were, from him. So let me go over a couple of things from the article a moment here. So voters are showing there, and have been, most of us, showing our opposition to the net zero climate agenda when we get the chance. But that isn't stopping the United Nations, which this week imposed these new taxes on carbon emissions. And this really is the definition of taxation without representation. So this is the International Maritime Organization, the IMO. You might have never heard of this. This is a UN body based in London, and they thought this was all going through today, but there's been this massive pushback. So the measure was, per every metric ton of carbon dioxide that the ship emits above certain limits, the tax would be $100 to $380 per metric ton, depending on all sorts of other things. Now this gets even more crazy in a moment. So they said this would result in $10 to $12 billion of taxes per year. And the thing that really surprised me about this was that they said, in effect, that what we are going to do with this money is not necessarily climate-based things, but they were going to use it to redistribute the wealth that wealthier nations have and give it to poorer nations. So this is absolutely 100% true. You can look this up because it probably sounds like, is Neil talking crazy stuff right now? There's no way this is true. It is absolutely 100% true. It's a wealth redistribution plan that really is behind it. So the Wall Street Journal did all this research on it as well, and they said that it would add 10 to 12% on top of global shipping. And when they spoke to the shippers, they said they're going to pass this on to the customers. So this would add 10 to 12% on everybody. The money then, I started doing my own research here. So where does the money go to? It says it would be paid directly into a UN-controlled fund, which would be redistributed to poorer nations. Now, if you actually look at where the UN gets their money, roughly 90% of their revenue comes from governments. They said this money pot, which would be managed by agency staff, would support these. Here we go. You would get a reward if you have a low emission ship. You would get penalized if you have a high emission ship. And then they would use the money for transition incentives in developing nations. it is just insane, this stuff. Hold on, I started doing a ton of research for you, so let me open my research document now then. Okay. Yeah, so the US did do a massive pushback on this. President Trump actually made a statement saying that anyone who votes for this and who tries to impose this would get massive sanctions or tariffs on their country, and he would not permit this to go through. So whoever he sent to the UN voted this down right away, and no doubt made notes of all the other countries that were voting for it. So this, one moment, I've got so many notes here, I've just got to grab it all here. Here we go. So they said that if it was adopted, it would increase costs for consumers worldwide of around 10 to 12%. So globally, 10 to 12%. It would enable the shift of economic power to leave nation states and be more concentrated within the United Nations framework, part of their goals. It would create a new revenue stream for this institution, and it would set the foundation for future global taxes. Now, one thing you got to bear in mind as well here is this would be the first ever global tax placed on citizens all around the world. The first one in history. There isn't one currently right now that I'm aware of. Anyway, if you think there is, please drop a comment below. But this would be the first one in history, the first global tax of 10 to 12%. But we've known this has been coming for a long time because they've been talking about how they want to do this and pass it on, and more equitable world for all, etc. Now, I wanted to look into some other points around the UN to find out, well, what are their goals right now? What is it that they're actually trying to achieve? And do they want to be this global government? And actually, when you look at a lot of the opinion pieces and you do the research, the answer is yes. They're slowly acquiring all these powers that actually defines a government. So that's regulations globally, taxation, courts, military, control over the narrative of what we say, media, policy making, having authority above nation states. And if you think, when this was formed in the UN Charter was 1945 when this was actually formed. What was the purpose of it, if you think about it? It was the end of World War II. It was to prevent wars, resolve any disputes that were coming out of the wars, cooperate on shared issues, right? That was the UN Charter of 1945. But if you think now, what are they doing? They've got the World Trade Organization, the WTO, the World Health Organization, WHO, the IMO, which is your shipping, IPCC, UNESCO. I mean, there's loads of these organizations, absolutely loads of them. They've got the ICJ, the International Court of Justice, the ICC as well, that's the International Criminal Court. It's not technically the UN, but it is UN-backed. So they have the jurisdiction over nations now. Global taxation. This is the first one they are implementing. Global military structure. So I looked into this as well. So let me show you the charter on the global military structure, which is here, this piece here. So Charter of the United Nations then, here it is. All members of the UN, let me just change this camera a second so you can actually see me here if you want to. All members of the UN, in order to contribute to the maintenance of international peace and security, undertake to make available to the Security Council on its call and in accordance with a special agreement or agreements, armed forces, you can see it here, there it is, assistance and facilities, including rites of passage, necessary for the purpose of maintaining international peace and security. Such agreement or agreement shall govern the number and types of forces. So they say what happens here, their degree of readiness, general location, and the nature of the facilities and assistance to be provided. The agreement shall be negotiated as soon as possible on the initiative of the Security Council. This, I mean, if you don't find this worrying, I don't know what to say, because I find this deeply worrying. And just before we go back into so global military structure, just a real quick one. If you check the description and pinned comment before, down below, I've got the rapid cash flow program for you. Have a look at that today. If you want to make some extra income, you want to start a new job, you want to start a side hustle, etc., below in the description. Okay, so here we go. Let's have a quick look at this then. Point number 5 of this was the control of information. So they now have their information bureau, as it were, the UN does. And the UNESCO dictates global education standards. They work with big tech for misinformation, or these new policies around misinformation, sustainable development. They control the laws. They have international agreements, crises, moral pressure. Every major global issue becomes this excuse now to take on more power. So let me give you some examples. Climate change, global taxes, regulations. We know this to be true. And now they want to do this new global tax, 10 to 12% for wealthier nations, as it were, because that's who's going to get hit. Remember, during COVID, the health crisis, what did they do? Travel lockdowns everywhere. Travel restrictions, as it were. Lockdowns, medical policies under the WHO. What about human rights? Do they interfere when it comes to human rights in, say, the UK or freedom of speech? Nope, that's absolutely fine. But they will interfere with other things. I just saw an article today, and I thought, thank goodness, this, I can't remember which organisation it was within the UN, but it said that they're going to be taking the UK to the court of law over this policy. And I was like, yes, thank goodness, they're finally going to be doing something about freedom of speech, because it was talking about freedom of speech. No, it was freedom of speech of trans rights. I was like, okay, so they're brushing over all the issue which is causing and leading towards pretty much civil war in the UK at some point in the future. And they're focusing this massive case on trans rights, which affects what? 0.1% of the population. And then you've got a huge amount of the population which are affected by these freedom of speech laws and misinformation and digital ID and everything else. Of course, the reason they don't do any of this stuff is because digital ID is a UN policy. It's one of their SDGs, of course. What was the other one? Migration, this push for open borders. They want open borders everywhere. Disinformation, speech regulation. All of this stuff is really eroding sovereignty for all of us. So I wanted to look at how much the UN collects each year and where it comes from. So number one, then, they get 3.5 billion per year from political work. It says it comes from political work. Peacekeeping, 6 to 7 billion a year. And then and then they get voluntary funding, which is 50 to 60 billion per year. So roughly then the UN takes in 60 to 70 billion dollars per year. Where does the money come from? It's a bit of a mystery. I've tried to dig into it. It doesn't want to give me the info. They said, though, the United States is the largest contributor. I wonder if that will continue. It says they're the largest contributor. But here's where it got really weird when I dived even deeper. It said a lot of their sources as well is investment income. So the UN has a lot of investments. Also fees. To be a member, you have to pay fees. Partnerships with NGOs, so they earn a lot of money from NGOs. And loans. So they give out a lot of loans to banks, and it says IMF system and all sorts of private financial entities. Interesting. Now, where does the budget go? 60% of it goes to salaries and bureaucracy. How can 60% of that money go to salaries? There's a lot of weird stuff going on here, in my opinion. So they were the main things I wanted to sort of go over today with all of this. So in effect, they wanted to impose, and they've already done it, this global tax now on all citizens, which will account to about 10 to 12%. First ever global tax. President Trump has pushed back on it. He said absolutely no, and he's going to put massive tariffs on any country that tries to push this through. So thank you for that, because we do not want to be paying all these extra taxes. So yeah, I'm very glad that he's done this massive pushback, and there we go. Let me see if there's any comments here since we're at 15 minutes. Can I hear a frog in the background? No, there's no frog. Need to evict the UN from the US? Yeah, we definitely do. We need to get rid of the UN. Close the UN, people said. Another money grab. Yeah. Eventually, I just think it's going to end up with they're going to keep pushing for this global one world government, which is what they're focused on. It's only a matter of time. Hopefully most of us will no longer be alive at that point, because that would not be an enjoyable world to live in, where they control everything. But we're getting close now. Digital IDs are launching everywhere. The last one after the digital IDs, because they're doing the travel stuff as well now, will be the CBDC, central bank digital currencies. That will be the last one. After that, it's pretty much game over. They'll control everything, and that's when and you can read all this for yourself, by the way. That's when the spending stuff will come in. What you can buy, what you can't buy, everything will be controlled. It'll be pretty crazy. Hopefully I won't still be alive at that point, but I will. I will definitely. Yeah, maybe I'll just move to a remote island somewhere and escape all this craziness. All right, thanks for being online. Appreciate you. Take care. God bless.